This lecture will introduce you to seventh chords. We're going to talk about the qualities of seventh chords. We're going to talk about seventh chords as they appear in major and minor keys. And we're going to talk about the inversion of seventh chords, including using figured bass to label those inversions. Behind me, I've written some seventh chords on the board. And again, seventh chords are tertian chords. They consist of, in their simplest form, of stacks of notes a third apart. And when a seventh chord is written this way as a stack of thirds, the bottom note is called the root, the next note is called the third, the next note is called the fifth, so it's just like the triad, but then we add another note on top of it, which is called the seventh of a chord. Now, when we figure out the qualities of seventh chords, the easiest way to do it is to look first at the quality of the triad and then at the quality of the seventh, the interval of the seventh. Underneath this chord, I'm going to write the quality of the triad, which is major, and then the seventh from F to E is a major seventh. And that means that this is called a major seventh, or we could just call it a major seventh chord. So the first M means major triad, the second M means a major seventh above the root, and this abbreviation is for a major seventh chord, or major seventh chord. Let me start with the other seventh chords that have the same label for the triad as for the seventh. So we're going to skip this guy for a minute and go on to this guy. The triad here, F, A flat, C, is minor, and the seventh from F to E flat is a minor seventh. And you may have already anticipated this. This is called a minor seventh, or we could just refer to it as a minor seventh chord. The last chord that I've written here, the triad F, A flat, C flat, is diminished. The seventh from F to E double flat is 1/2 step smaller than the seventh over here from F to E flat. So it is a diminished seventh. And we refer to this as a diminished seventh chord, or we could call it, if you wanted to, a DD7. That's not the symbol that your book uses. Your book shows the seventh chord quality the same way that it would show the quality of the interval of a seventh. And we could call this either a diminished seventh chord, or some people call it a fully diminished, because there's also a thing called a half diminished. But the fully doesn't really do anything for us. Just calling it a diminished seventh chord is good enough. So now let's look at the two cases that are sort of hybrids. If you have a major triad and a minor seventh, then you have a capital M, little m seventh. And this is referred to as a major hyphen minor seventh chord, or you can call it a dominant seventh chord. The reason is that this is the quality of seventh chord that's found if you build it on the fifth note of the scale. So like if we were in the key of B flat major, where F is the fifth or dominant note of the scale, then this would be the seventh chord. B flat major has 2 flats, including E flat, so this would be the dominant seventh chord. It has this quality of being major minor. And if you have a diminished triad and a minor seventh, then you have what's called a half diminished seventh, and it has a circle with a little slash through it, 7. You could also call it a DM7 for diminished triad minor seventh, but the most common way to refer to this is as a half diminished seventh chord. So those are our 5 types of seventh chords: major seventh chord, major minor seventh chord, minor seventh chord, half diminished seventh chord or diminished minor, and diminished seventh chord. Notice that the only kind of seventh chord you can make with a minor triad is a minor seventh chord. You can't put a major seventh on a minor triad. nor can you put a diminished seventh on a minor triad. With a major triad, you have two options. You can either have the major seventh or the minor seventh. And with the diminished triad, you have two options. You either have the half diminished seventh or the diminished seventh. Likewise, we don't really have a seventh chord that we can build on an augmented triad. Theoretically, an augmented major seventh chord is possible. That's actually a very nice chord. It sounds like this. But it's not really part of tonal music, so we won't be talking about it this semester. One more thing to point out to you. Notice how when I wrote this half diminished seventh chord and when I wrote this diminished seventh chord, notice that I can't really put all the flats right on top of each other because they're too tall and they would run into each other. See how I've kind of staggered the flats so that some of them are closer to the notes and others are farther away? This is how you should write your seventh chords and triads too. Don't make your flats so little that I can't see them. And if you make them full size, don't put them right on top of each other. Always vary the distance that they are from the chord so that each flat or sharp or double flat or double sharp is clearly separate and not touching the other accidentals. Okay, here's example D8. It shows the automatic quality of the seventh chords that you'll find in all major keys and in all minor keys. First, let's look at C major. Okay, so these would be all the natural notes. Notice that we have two major seventh chords. We have C major seventh and F major seventh. The dominant note of the scale, G, has a major minor seventh built on it, or a dominant seventh chord. All of the minor triads, D minor, E minor, and A minor, have minor seventh chords going along with them because that's the only kind of seventh chord you can have. And on the leading tone, we have this diminished triad, B, D, F, and then we put a minor seventh on it, so it's a half diminished seventh chord. Turning next to a minor key, C minor, once again, the 5 chord, or the dominant chord, and the chord that we build on scale degree 7, the leading tone chord, these are going to have leading tones in the chords coming from the harmonic form of the minor scale. But don't use the harmonic form of the minor scale on the mediant chord or on the tonic chord. For these, you should use the natural form of the minor scale. So when we do that, the minor triads, the tonic and the subdominant triad, will have minor triads and minor seventh chords. The supertonic seventh chord is a half diminished seventh chord. The major triads, E flat major and A flat major, the mediant and the submediant, will be major seventh chords, or major seventh chords. The dominant seventh chord is the same as it is in major. It's the major minor or dominant seventh. And on the leading tone, this time instead of having a half diminished seventh chord, we have an A flat on top, and that makes it a diminished seventh chord. And once again, this is what we're going to find in all minor keys, provided that you remember to use the harmonic form of the minor correctly. And this is what you're going to find in all major keys. Let's get some practice thinking about seventh chord quality. And we're going to start with seventh chords like these over here that have no accidentals on them. So we'll turn back to the white note seventh chords. Let's start with a major seventh chord, C, E, G, E. So that's a major seventh chord. This would be the same for the F, A, C, E seventh chord, which is also a major seventh chord. Maybe I'll use F, A, C, E because this way I won't have to write ledger lines. If you take this major seventh chord and you flat the top note or lower the top note, you'll get a major minor seventh chord. Or if you keep the top note the same and you raise all the other notes, again, you get a major minor seventh chord. F sharp major, and then a minor seventh on top of that. If you take the major triad, F, A, C, and you make it minor, and also make the seventh minor, then what you have is a minor minor seventh. And you can take the major triad FAC and turn it into a diminished triad by making it F sharp AC. And then with the diminished seventh on top, you have a diminished seventh. So it would actually be good for you to play around a little bit with the seventh chord C, E, G, B and FACE and think about all the different combinations of accidentals that you can have to make different types of seventh chords. Major minor seventh chords, minor minor seventh chords. Figure out how to make a half diminished seventh chord. Figure out how to make a diminished seventh chord. And that'll be true for any FACE seventh chord and any CEGB seventh chord. The seventh chords that are naturally minor, DFAC, EGBD, AC, EG, these are all minor sevenths. Now I didn't show you this before, but if you take a minor seventh chord like ACEG, and if you put the same accidental on every note, A flat, C flat, E flat, G flat, it's still a minor seventh chord. You've just moved the whole thing down by a half step. But you can take one of these minor seventh chords, make the third major, and now you have a major minor seventh chord. Make the third and the seventh both major, and you have a major major seventh chord, and so on. Play around with DFAC, EGBD, and ACEG. See if you can write, by using different combinations of accidentals, a different major minor seventh chord. See if you can make a half diminished seventh chord. See if you can make a fully diminished seventh chord. The white key seventh chord, which is unique, is the B, D, F, A seventh chord. It is a half diminished seventh chord. In order to make it a major seventh chord, you could make the root a B flat. Now we have a B flat major triad, and we have a major seventh above that, major major seventh. Make the A flat, and we have a major minor seventh chord. Keep the B as a B natural and make the F sharp. Now we have a minor triad, and we'll put a minor seventh on top of that. We have a minor minor seventh chord. Take the half diminished seventh, D, F, A, put an A flat on top of it, and we have a diminished seventh chord. So the best way to learn your seventh chords is to start messing around with the natural notes B, D, F, A, and add different combinations of sharps and flats and see how you can make various versions of a major minor seventh chord, of a major seventh chord, of a minor seventh chord, and so on. Okay, next I'm going to talk to you about inversions of seventh chords. Seventh chords are a little bit more complicated than triads because they have more notes, and that means that they can be inverted in more ways. So let's take a seventh chord like D, F, A, C. This is in root position. If we put the third on the bottom, F, A, C, D, we have a first inversion, seventh chord. If we put the fifth on the bottom, A, C, D, F, we have a second inversion, seventh chord. And unlike triads, seventh chords have a third inversion, which you get when you put the seventh on the bottom. When you're looking at inverted seventh chords and they're all squished together in a very close voicing with each other, one of the things to know is that you're always going to have two notes that wind up being a second apart because the seventh, DC, is inverting to become a second, CD. That's part of the inversion of the seventh chord, is that that interval has become inverted. Always be sure that you write the notes a little bit diagonal to each other. Don't write them on top of each other so that they're overlapping. And whenever you see a chord that has these two notes that are a second apart, the higher note is the root of the chord. So you can tell just by looking at a chord, like for instance, here, these two notes that are a second apart, the higher one is E. Therefore, you know that this is some kind of an E seventh chord. And if you stack it up, E, G, B, D, then you know that it's an E minor minor seventh chord. Now let's take a look at what happens when we put in the figures, the figured bass for these chords. Let me start by writing the full figured bass. So I'm going to write all the intervals above the bass note. We have a seventh above the bass, a fifth above the bass, and a third above the bass. Here we have a sixth above the bass, a fifth above the bass, and a third above the bass. Now we have a sixth above the bass, a fourth above the bass, and a third above the bass. And here we have a sixth above the bass, a fourth above the bass, and a second above the bass. So you could use the full figure to indicate the inversion of a seventh chord, and that would be understandable to a musician. But you can also use an abbreviation, just like you can with triads. The 5-3 can be invisible. If you just write a 7, that indicates that what you have is a root position seventh chord, and the 5 and the 3 are still there, they're just invisible, you can't see them. So 7 is actually short for 7-5-3. Now, for this chord, we're going to have to use two numbers. We can't use 5-3 because that would seem like it was a root position triad, and we can't use 6-3 because that would make it seem like it was a first inversion triad, but we can use a 6-5, and that gets across the idea that this is a dissonant chord, because above the bass you have both a fifth and a sixth, and those two notes are a second apart. And so the 6-5 tells us that the root is a sixth above the bass and the seventh is a fifth above the bass. And so 6-5 is what you would use to abbreviate 6-5-3 and to show a first inversion seventh chord. And by the same token, you would use 4-3 for a second inversion seventh chord. Again, you can't use 6-4 or 6-3 because those seem to refer to triads, but 4-3 shows you that you have dissonance. You have a third above the bass and a fourth above the bass, those two notes making a second. They are the root and the seventh of the chord and the 4-3. And then the abbreviation for the third inversion is either 4-2 or just 2. And the important thing here is the number 2, because that tells us that there is a note a second above the bass. The bass is the seventh of the chord, and a second above that is the root of the chord, because the seventh has been inverted to be a second. And these abbreviations are very easy to memorize because they go like this: 7, 6-5, 4-3, 2. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Let me finish by taking a look at example D7 with you. Example D7 is going to show you some of what I went over, and I just want to point out that it's here for your reference. So first of all, example D7 shows you the 5 types of seventh chords, the 5 qualities of seventh chords: major minor, major major, minor minor, half diminished, and diminished. And it also shows you the abbreviated figures: 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and 2 for the inverted seventh chords, and then it shows you the full figures underneath. And that's what you need to know about seventh chords. This concludes the lectures on Chapter D.